Hello and welcome back to 100 Days of Code with your host Lily Code. Today is day 77 and we're going to continue on with Sean Wassell's course, which was a shorter course on React, a 4.5 hour course. And some of it has been brilliant and most of it has been brilliant, but then some of it is also slightly outdated, which just happened so quickly in programming. It's of no fault of Sean Wassel's. It's to be expected, it happens, but it just meant we had to figure our own way around, which was perfectly fine. But depending on your level of experience, you may not have been able to bridge those gaps just yet until you have that little bit of experience with coding. So you wouldn't need much. I mean, it wasn't a huge bridge to gap, but I think in the beginning it would have really confused me, I wouldn't have really known how to put it all together. So that's just something to keep in mind. So we're going to continue on, and the chapter I'm doing at the moment is loading data and making network requests. So let's get into it and we'll find out as we go whether or not this is also outdated, or whether, like the first two full chapters, everything is perfect. Only the third chapter did we face some small problems with. I wouldn't even call them problems, but just to keep you guys informed of exactly how all this is unfolding. So thank you for joining me, and let's continue. Okay, so React doesn't rely on any particular request library to perform HTTP requests, so you can use any library that you are most comfortable with. So if you're using Axios or something, you can keep using that. And Sean Wassel is going to use the fetch API, which is great. That's what I'd have the most experience with, and then just normal HTTP post gets, like, without fetch. But this is the approach that I would normally follow, so stay tuned. And the one that I would also use in work. So it's a very common approach for anybody that's new to this. Cool. So as Shaun says, a fetch request is just a fetch request. You can write a fetch request to get your data, to post your data, to put your data, to interact with data on a server. You use the fetch request, and that's a JavaScript thing. It's already there, and you can use that in React in order to do this functionality. The question more when you're working with a React application is, where should I put this logic? Where's the right place to put my HTTP fetch? Or we're using HTTP fetch, but you could be using something else in order to do this. So where's the best place to write this code? That's the answer we're going to solve today. So using the effect hook is a good solution, because we can make the use of function within useEffect asynchronous, and then we can wait for the data to come back from the server. Okay, so we're going to use random user.me, and this is just a test API. Random user.me. This is just a random user generator. Imagine seeing yourself, oh my god. You'd freak, wouldn't you? I'm a bit freaked thinking I will see myself, but clearly not. No, I mean, these people had to have come from somewhere. It's dodgy. No, it's obviously, these are people who have, allowed their photos to be open source. They've made this decision, I'm sure. But it's just, seems strange, but it's not. It's just a random user generator. You can use this site to get somebody's information and a random user, and to then get it back from the back end and integrate it into your application. So good for testing purposes. So you can build out user interfaces without having to worry about creating all this test data. So very useful, Okay, so we're going to create a new component within our React application here. And the new component we're going to create will be called userprofilepage.js. So let's do that. In our pages here, we'll create a new file, and this will be called userprofilepage.js. So perfect. Okay, cool. So we'll just set this up as we always do. I was just checking what he was going to do, but that's all he's done. So we want to do the same thing that we always do. There is nothing new. We're gonna set up a component. Export const and the name of the component and an arrow function, and away we go. So export const user profile page. User profile page, and then this is an arrow function, like so. Cool. And then what we want to do in here is just return, and I'll open up my parentheses, and we'll close off as well. This is just a fragment just to get rid of the errors, just so we have our basic layout set up there. So what we're also going to do is create a state. So we're going to manage the state of something within this page, and that's going to be the user. So we will declare this. We'll say const, and this is the destructuring of the state, the two items that we're passing into the state here, so, or that we're getting back from the state, sorry. So it will be user and set user. So this is the function to set the first variable, and then we use state, open up our parentheses and add a semicolon, and then we need to import this from React, because this is an inbuilt React hook that we can use within our React components, which is why it's within our React component, the useState. So if we import useState from React. Perfect. And let's continue. So great. Perfect. And now we can, and we also want to set this up with an initial state, which is going to be an object in this case, with a property of name and just an empty object within that name. So perfect, within that key of name. Okay, cool. And then we'll just populate this down here. So rather than this being an empty fragment, we'll turn this into a div. This is what Shaun has done. So we'll copy what Shaun has done. And then we have a h3 tag. And in here we want to add the text name. And then we will send the data that we are tracking with our managed state here, and pass that in to our JSX code within our h3 tag, so that the name will actually display. So we'll say user.name.first, and then we'll also add their last name. So we'll add another JSX expression and say user.name.second, last. Yes, it's always first and last name, isn't it? It's not really first and second name. Although I guess you still could, but this will be data coming back from the back end. So their properties on the data coming back in the object in the back end in the JSON object will probably be name.first and name.last. That's what we expect them to be, unless we're going to transform them into this layout on receiving them. So we'll see now in a moment. And then we have email, what comes back from this back end, and we have user.email then. So this is just going to display this particular information, the first, the last name, and the email from the user that we pull from that test backend API. And because this is within our pages here, we also need to just export it from our index for easy import, so we can just import it in the same object as all the other pages. So we'll say export user profile page, and this is going to be got from the same level, so just a single dot and a slash, and then we can go down to user profile page like so and save. So perfect. And then in our app.js file we can use this, and I'm missing the keyword from there. And then in our app.js, I'll just close everything else because we've got quite a bit going on, so close others. And in here now I can add this page. Okay, so we did it just above the forms. Cool. So here's our forms, controlled and uncontrolled. Yes, we weren't properly navigating to those yesterday, but that's okay. I'm going to continue for the moment. So I will paste this in here. I forgot that. And then we will come to profile. Okay, and then we'll say user profile page. So users profile page. Perfect. And it added that import for us at the top of the page as well. And we'll also add a link to this to our nav bar so we can actually navigate to it. So great. We will copy and paste the last link item here. Cool, so user profile page, awesome. And here I will just say user. And is that what I called it back in the app? No, I called it profile, so this should be user, just to keep them aligned so that it actually knows what route we are talking about. It wouldn't have known because I'd call them two separate things there. And now we're going to go back to our user profile page and get this data from the back end by using useEffect. So we can add useEffect, which is another hook into our object import here, the different things that we are importing from React. So we'll add useEffect, here we go. And then we can use useEffect. So we will just say useEffect, which takes in a function like so. And then we will say const fetch user. So this is the function that's actually going to get that data back from the back end. We'll make this an asynchronous function because we want to wait until we receive that data back from the back end, which is all an asynchronous function is. Turns it into a promise to tell it it's waiting for something. And then we open up our object notation, our function notation, and say const response is equal to await. So this is the result we are awaiting, and it's the result of a fetch. Cool, so where we're going to fetch this data from is this URL. So let's copy and paste. Cool. And we need to forward slash to API. And then we will convert this into a JavaScript object by saying const data is equal to await response.json. And then we can set the user. So great, we will set the user to data.results 0. So this just means when we fetch that data, the first person back in that array of results will be set to the user. So let's save. Perfect. Let's reload our page and let's click on user profile page and see what happens. Great. Okay. Cool. So really, this should be working. So, and so it is. Do I need to run fetch user at the end? Yep, so we need to actually run this. So just tell it to go. So we'll say fetch user and pass our brackets to say run this function, and now that should actually run. And look at that, there we go. We are getting new names and it should be results 0. Okay. Oh, we should add a dependencies array. So if we just add an empty dependencies array, this will tell it to only run once and we will stop it being called like it was loads of times there. So if we reload, cool, we get one name. Great. Cool. There you go. Absolutely super duper. Yes, so the function that we passed to the useEffect took here, this function, we couldn't make this async because you're not allowed to do that because useEffect returns back a cleanup function. So that's why we don't add that async here, and instead we define a function within the useEffect to call asynchronously, and then we call that function within the useEffect. So that's what's going on there. You can't just add the async up when you are creating this function up here. Because useEffect returns a callback, you instead create a function inside useEffect when you want to fetch some data back from the backend. This is just your fetch, your standard fetch, and then you pass it the URL, and if you don't pass any other parameters, it's automatically a get request. So this is getting data back from the backend, and then this is just very standard notation for getting back data. So you often transform it into something, then here we're transforming it into a JSON, and then you can set the user, which is using the state, in order to manage the state of one of these users. So that's just saving the first person back in the list to the user, and that's why then we can go user.name.first in order to access that user's information and show it on the screen. So that's what's going on there. Super cool. Manus Oldenhus. Hi Manahus Oldenhus. Probably not saying his name very right, but that's okay. Cool. Cool, so now we're moving on to a new section. Well, no, we're not yet. We're still in lesson 4. Okay, but that's good to know that that lesson 4.3 doesn't break anything. Okay. Just because some of the other things we did during this chapter were not really possible. They had since changed, you know. So we're going to be looking at using the children's props now. So great. This is another thing that we have to use a lot. So normally if we come and have a look at the counter button page, Here we go, our counter button page. This is our JSX element that we are using here, our component, our congratulations message component, which is injected into this counter button page. And if we go to our congratulations message here, we can see this is its own component, and we're injecting this into the counter button page here. And you can see what props are used on a component when you define it, because they'll be passed in when you're actually calling that component to be used. So here the props are the number of clicks, the threshold, and unhide. So if we go into the congratulations message, we can see those are the props that are passed through to this component. So this is what we're going to look at now, the props and the children. Okay,